Pursuant to notice on July 22nd, the committee meets to consider nominations of legislation and note the presence of a quorum. I ask unanimous consent to enter a written opening statement for the record. I'll just keep my opening remarks pretty brief. Basically, to thank everybody. This is our third markup. And I think as every markup proceeds, I think we're seeing greater and greater cooperation between members and a lot of hard work by the staff to take a look at those pieces of legislation that have been referred to our committee, look at those, evaluate them, find the areas of agreement, and then move forward in these types of markups. So I think we've done it again. I think the number of bills, they're kind of being reduced, which is to be expected. But again, I think what we're seeing in these pieces of legislation is small incremental improvements towards solving individual problems, kind of a pretty broad range of them as well. So again, I just want to thank all the members, all the staff that work very hard trying to find those areas of agreement on things that we can improve the efficiency, the effectiveness, and accountability of government. And that's what we're going to be trying to do here today. So with that, Senator Carper.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks so much for bringing us together, Mr. Chairman, and for everybody that's worked very hard right up until right now. And I know a lot of staff's been involved in this on both sides, and we're grateful for everyone's participation. Some would look at the agenda and say, well, there are a lot of smaller bills, maybe more modest bills, but I think even those are important. And we have a couple that are very much needed. I'll just flag one of them and express my thanks to the chairman and others on the committee for working with us on that. And that is the legislation that's designed to help us address the growing flood, if you will, of cyber intrusions into our .gov domain. And we have the opportunity here to make real progress on a system that's going to help us in intrusion detection and prevention, and we want to do that. I'm pleased that we're going to move forward together, and by analyzing internet traffic into and out of our federal agencies. And I won't get into all the details, but this is a good step forward. And we'll have the opportunity. I don't know that we're going to do cybersecurity legislation information sharing next week. I discussed it with some of our Republican leaders, and I think they're talking about maybe moving TSCA, Toxic Substance Control Act, next week. We have over 50 co-sponsors, half Democrat and half Republican on that, which is pretty amazing. And that may take much of next week. But my hope is that shortly after the break, after the recess, we'll be able to move forward on cybersecurity information sharing. And the part of that would be the work that we're doing today here on intrusion detection and prevention. So I think that stars, sun and moon might be lined up to do that. That would be a very good thing. And we can be an important part of that today. So thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you, Senator Carper. The way we're going to proceed here is we have a quorum of 6 to debate and vote on amendments, but we're going to need 9 members to proceed to final passage on anything. We have a block of, I think, non-controversial piece of legislation. So, when we get the 9, we may suspend a discussion on a bill that we're seeking to amend or debate, and then we'll move back to that bill, because I know we've got a lot of people moving in and out with the Armed Services Committee hearings as well. So, with that, why don't we move to our first piece of legislation. The committee will proceed to the consideration of S. 1869, the Federal Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2015, and open it up for amendment. Let me just say, I think this is an important piece of legislation. I commend Senator Carper for all of his work on that, and again, thank he and his staff, as well as the Secretary and Department of Homeland Security is kind of working with us on this. I think the overall reason this has to be we need to authorize, for example, the Einstein program is there are agencies that simply don't believe they have the authority to, basically install this protection on their IT systems. And so this is very important. I think it's from standpoint of just authorizing activity, and the expenditure is also an important step. So I appreciate the work we've done in this. I think we've struck a pretty good balance here. It'd be my intention to try and move this along with the information sharing bill that sounds like we may not be moving to September. But as we saw with the breach in OPM and all these other problems we've had, we had a hearing on the breach in IRS. These are serious issues. this is a good system. It provides a platform for further expansion as the hackers get more sophisticated. We have to increase our level of security as well. So this system, I think, gives the government that capability, which is why I think it's important for our committee to move on this.
Yeah. Let me just add briefly, if I can. I think we started off working on this legislation several months ago, and the idea was to speed up the adoption of Einstein 3A, and to make sure that a lot more than half of the federal agencies were being helped by its capabilities. And we've moved beyond that to advance the system's capabilities by requiring that it includes the most advanced cyber technologies, including leading commercial tools, and evolves to better protect the agencies as the threats actually evolve. So it's not something that's like stopped in time, but it's forward-looking, forward-thinking. We codify into law some strong privacy protections, which I think are appropriate. We increase transparency. We increase accountability by requiring annual status reports. And finally, and I think this might have been an idea that was suggested by the chairman and his staff, but the legislation improves cyber hygiene. We had a meeting yesterday with Jane Hall-Lute, who used to be Deputy Secretary of DHS, who's really smart on cyber issues and actually explain it so even I can understand it. But we had a long conversation with her yesterday, and she mentioned that there are about 8 or 9 things. If we would consistently do those who use the internet, we could eliminate about 90% of the attacks, the successful attacks on our system. So we include this provision here on cyber hygiene by requiring best practices at federal agencies, including strong encryption and 2-factor authentication. So those are some of the provisions in the bill. Started as a fairly narrow bill. I think it's gotten better along the way. I understand that Senator Sass has a couple of amendments that he's going to offer. I will strongly oppose both of them because they are, in the words of Speaker John Boehner this morning, no, I'm just kidding. No, I look forward to supporting them both.
With that, does any member wish to discuss the bill or introduce an amendment?
Can I call up 2 amendments? SAS 1 as modified.
I don't think your mic is on, Ben.
Sorry, it's not.
It's hard to tell.
Shows that it is.
There you go.
Yep. SAS 1 as modified essentially requires the Director of National Intelligence to look at what is called the mosaic of unclassified information and figure out if all that should remain unclassified even when compiled in a mosaic. So.
Good.
Number 2 at the same time?
Let's do them in block.
Yeah, we can do, yeah, I think that's fine.
SAS number 2 as modified requires the Director of National Intelligence to conduct a damage assessment of the recent OPM breach. A damage assessment is a commonly used tool to assess the level of fallout from bad events.
Okay, I think these are good improvements to the bill. I have no problems with them whatsoever. Senator Carper?
Should we accept them? You want to move, or should we just take them by unanimous consent?
Yeah, let me just, I would say right now, this would be a good time to spend discussion on this. We do have a number of pieces of legislation. Well, we've got a voting quorum of 9. Let's move to this block, and I would ask unanimous consent that we consider reporting the following bills in block. S 1864, the DHS Border Security Metrics Act of 2015. S 1846, Critical Infrastructure Protection Act 2015 as modified by the Johnson Substitute Amendment. S 1073, Stop Improper Payments to Deceased People Act as modified by the Johnson-Carper Amendment 1 and Sass Amendment 1. S 1868, Quarterly Financial Reporting Reauthorization Act of 2015 as modified by Sass Amendment 1. S 1808, Northern Border Security Review Act as modified by Heidkamp Substitute Amendment. S 779, Fair Access to Science and Technology Research Act of 2015 as modified by the Johnson-Carper Substitute Amendment. S 1170, Breast Cancer Research Stamp Reauthorization Act of 2015. HR 1531, Land Management Workforce Flexibility Act. S 1826, Wisconsin Postal Naming Bill, and S 1596, Ohio Postal Naming Bill. Do you have any objections?
A question, just a clarification. On S 1816, our Federal Cybersecurity Enhancement Act, where Senator Sass has his 2 amendments offered, does the motion call for the inclusion of those amendments?
No, we suspended that and we'll move to just this group of M block.
Okay,
We'll move back to that.
Is our cybersecurity bill included? We're going to come
No,
back.
we're gonna come back to that,
Okay,
yeah.
good, okay.
So, hearing no objection, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The measures are reported favorably.
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask to be recorded as a no on S 1864, the border metrics bill, please.
So ordered. The committee will now proceed to consideration of, no, I know, we're going back to, what's that? Oh, do we need to do that as well? Okay, yeah, the committee will now proceed to consideration of the nominee on our agenda, Denise Turner Roth, to be the Administrator of the General Services Administration. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The nominee is reported to the full Senate. So now we can return to the Federal Cybersecurity Enhancement Act and Senator Sass's two amendments. I guess I would ask consent to just vote on those by voice vote. No objection. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendments are passed. Does any other member wish to discuss the bill or introduce an amendment?
Senator Paul had a number of amendments that he wanted to offer. He's not here. I don't know if he's left instruction or requests that any of his amendments be offered. Several of them, 3 of the 8 are ones that I'm prepared to support.
We're going to, if he does not come, I'm prepared to offer 2 of them. So, Paul Amendment 1 and 6, but I thought I'd wait till the very end. Okay, sure. So I will call up for Senators Ayotte, McCaskill, and myself, amendment number, I got to call it, the amendment 1 and 2. And they're both as modified. So anybody want to? Okay, these are, I was hoping Kelly'd be here to. So I'll just quickly discuss the Ayotte and McCaskill Amendment number 1. The amendment would require that the Secretary ensure that Einstein, number 1, is necessary to protect the information systems it covers from cyber threats. 2, that DHS will only keep information related to cyber threats. 3, that users of the system are notified that Einstein could be used. It would also require that the Attorney General review policies and procedures governing access to information of Einstein within 1 year. As modified, we think this amendment improves the bill, making sure that DHS does not take lightly the responsibility that comes with its new authorities under the bill. The Ayotte and McCaskill-Johnson Amendment number 2. Number 1 would provide the Secretary of Homeland Security expanded authority to issue directives to agencies to mitigate substantial security threats. 2, provide the Secretary authority to implement those measures himself if the threat is imminent and the directive is not reasonably likely to result in a timely response. And 3, require that OMB report to Congress annually on the number of times OMB has used its existing enforcement authority to force an agency to comply with OMB's promulgated cybersecurity policies. We don't think that happened very often. And I think that the purpose of all of these is, and I think this is, as I stated in the beginning, there are some agencies that don't believe they have the authority to actually implement Einstein. As was, I think, the case with OPM, there may be agencies that may be dragging their feet, and they need to be prompted. And certainly, I have been pretty impressed with the technical capabilities of the staff within DHS when it comes to cybersecurity. And let's face it, this is the department that is tasked with this, and I'm happy to support giving them greater authority to basically prompt and require some of these agencies to protect the data within our federal IT system. So I'm supportive of these amendments. Anybody else like to discuss them? Senator Carper.
Some of you know that Senator Collins worked on these issues for a number of years, and she, along with others, and I think some people sitting at this table right now, joined Susan in offering legislation that's actually complementary to the legislation that the chairman and I are offering. And what Senator Ayotte and Senator McCaskill and Chairman Johnson have done here today with their amendments 1 and 2. We call them A1 and 2, are, I think, very complementary and actually strengthen what we're trying to accomplish. I would ask unanimous consent to be added as a co-sponsor to amendment number 2, and I would urge the adoption of both amendments.
Without objection, so ordered. Is there any further debate on the amendment? Hearing none, the question is on its adoption. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The amendments are agreed to as modified. Are there any other amendments? There's my screen. Okay. So let me then offer for Senator Paul. I ask unanimous consent to adopt Senator Paul's Amendment 1 and 6, which I understand to be non-controversial amendments. Senator Paul's first amendment would clarify the liability protection provided to Internet service providers that offer Einstein to federal agencies doesn't allow them to violate agreements with their users. That is not the intent of this bill, so I support this amendment. Senator Paul's sixth amendment would require DHS report on the number of individuals whose personal information was captured and stored by the Einstein program and that wasn't related to cybersecurity risk. This is information that Einstein shouldn't be collecting, so I also support this amendment. Are there any objections to either of those?
No objections. I think they're both good amendments and would support them, or would urge your support.
Okay. And again, amendment number 6 was presented or offered as modified. So there's no further debate on these amendments. Hearing none, the question is on their adoption. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The amendments are agreed to as modified. Are there any other amendments? Apparently not. If there is no further debate or amendment, the question is on final passage of S 1869 as amended. I guess I request. And we will request a roll call vote on this. So the clerk will call the roll.
Senator McCain.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Portman. Senator Paul.
No instructions.
Senator Langford. Senator Enzi.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Ayotte.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Ernst.
Aye.
Senator Sass. Senator Carper.
Aye.
Senator McCaskill.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Tester.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Baldwin.
Aye.
Senator Heitkamp.
Aye.
Senator Booker.
Aye by proxy.
Senator Peters.
Aye.
Senator Johnson.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, on the vote of those present, the yeas are 9, the nays are 0. On the vote by proxy, and for the record only, the yeas are 6, the nays are 0. On this vote, the yeas are 9, the nays are 0, and the motion is agreed to.
Good.
Sorry.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. The committee will now proceed to consideration of S 1607, Independent Agency Regulatory Analysis Act of 2015. This is a Portman-Collins-Warner bill. I'll ask Senator Portman if he'd like to discuss it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to start by thanking you and the ranking member for not just having this markup, but by operating this committee in a way that we're actually getting stuff done and continually holding markups. So I'll give you an example of that. Earlier this year, we marked up legislation regarding permitting reform, another regulatory reform issue. That legislation is now part of the underlying highway bill, which may well be passed by this Senate in the next 24 hours. And it's great legislation that came out of this committee on a bipartisan basis. In that case, we did what we're going to do today, which is we had a markup scheduled, and at the last minute, we had some concerns raised by the other side of the aisle. We wanted to address those concerns. You allowed us to postpone that markup briefly. We then were able to get even more support for the legislation to the point that it was marked up with a large bipartisan majority. And again, it's part of a bill that's going over to the House, and I think eventually will find itself on the President's desk and will become law. and will help us build things in this country and create more jobs. This is another example of that. This is the Independent Agency Regulatory Analysis Act. Many of you have been involved in this issue over the years, including Senator Lankford recently with his subcommittee hearing. And as someone told me recently, Rob, this is a no-brainer. Why haven't we gotten this done? Well, because we're working through concerns that people have had, trying to make sure that we can keep this bipartisan as well and get it done. But it makes all the sense in the world. We've had lots of testimony about it before the committee. And, Mr. Chairman, today, if you don't mind, I'll talk about it for a second, but then we're going to withdraw our proposal that it be marked up today, and instead, at the request of a couple members of the committee on the other side of the aisle, work with them to try to come up with a more bipartisan product in September. And if you are willing to give us some space on the agenda at your next markup, that would be much appreciated. But bottom line is, for 30 years, you know, presidents of both parties have said you got to do a cost-benefit analysis of any new regulations. This has been bipartisan, but it applies only to executive branch agencies, and independent agencies have not been subject to that. There are more than a dozen major regulatory agencies now that are considered independent. They have increasing power. They issue more and more rules, particularly what are defined as major rules, being impact of over $100 million. The Federal Communications Commission would be one, the SEC would be one, CFTC would be another. But the problem is their economic analysis, their testing of the costs and benefits at best is inconsistent and sometimes non-existent. I will tell you that OMB has told us, based on their most recent report, that not one of the 18 major rules issued by an independent agency in 2013 was based on a complete cost-benefit analysis, not one. So experts on, again, across the spectrum have said there ought to be some analysis. There is some difference of opinion as to what the analysis ought to be, who ought to do it. What we have said in our bill, and this is Senator Warner and myself, Senator Collins, we've introduced this bill over the years, but what we have said, okay, let's have OIRA, which is the group, as you know, within the Office of Management and Budget that does it for the executive branch agencies, do a review of these regulations and send it back to the agency as a recommendation. There would not be the same return process there is with regard to the executive branch agencies because these agencies are independent, but at least we would then have the opportunity to get the kind of economic analysis and the expertise from OIRA included in the independent agency process. So I think, again, this is a common sense approach. It's a bill that has broad support. By the way, all the former OIRA directors we've talked to support it. We've had testimony in here, again, from Democrats and Republicans alike who have said that this is something that we ought to move forward with. The National Federation of Independent Business, NFIB, the NAM, the ABA, leading scholars of the regulatory and administrative law sections of the ABA, they've all supported this. It's also something that has been in the President's remarks. He has said that he thinks that independent agencies ought to be subject to a cost-benefit analysis. In a sense, this is codifying what the President has talked about. I want to particularly thank Senator Heitkamp, who's here today, for her work with me on this. I know she would have been supportive today, but she also was supportive of us giving a little more time to this so that Senator McCaskill and others who have an interest could come on board. And so I appreciate her working with us on this. And overall, I think this is one of those bills that actually has a chance to get to the President's desk. And with your support, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate Senator Carper's working with us on this as well. We hope to get him as well. I think this can be the law of the land, and it will help with regard to this increasing power of independent agencies to be sure they too are subject to the kind of cost-benefit analysis that just makes sense. So I thank you for your willingness to consider us at your next markup, which I believe will be in September. And in the meantime, we're going to be working double time to try to get as much support as possible and to address the concerns that have been raised.
Well, thanks, Senator Portman. And of course, I'm very supportive of this effort, and I also appreciate the fact that you're willing to, pull it back, continue to discuss, just like we did in the permitting bill, and try and find that common ground, find the areas of agreement so we can get this on the President's desk and make this law. So happy to give you that space, and we certainly wish you the best of luck and want to do everything we can to help make that happen. Senator Carper, do you want to?
Just to say, I too appreciate the thoughtful way you approach this matter, and we've appreciated a chance to work with you to this point in time. And with Senator Heitkamp and others, we'll hopefully be able to come to an agreement on a bill that can actually be signed into law. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Would anybody like to further discuss this bill? Because let me just say there are two other bills on the markup that we've lost our voting quorum. We won't be able to vote on, but I'm happy to discuss them. I want to discuss them. So anything more on this bill before we move on to others?
I just want to thank Senator Portman. I know it was short notice asking for a little extra time, but I think if we can do what we did with the permitting bill, we're going to move forward a lot quicker than simply moving this today. And so it's a wise decision, and one we come to expect from Senator Portman, who is a wise man. And
Not a wise guy,
yeah, well,
but a wise
I didn't mean that.
I know why.
And
Every now
also want to thank Senator Warner.
Well, thank you. Let's then proceed to a discussion on S-708, the Regulatory Improvement Act of 2015. This is sponsored by Senators King, Blunt, Wicker, and Shaheen, and referred to this committee. A quick description. This is modeled off the BRAC commissions. Bipartisan Blue Ribbon Commission developed recommendations for elimination, consolidation, or repeal of regulations. This is something I'm supportive of. We got pretty close, I think, in terms of moving this across the finish line. I think the biggest stumbling block right now is once this commission reports out the regulations that need to be eliminated, consolidated, streamlined, modernized, whatever whatever we're going to do with these regulations, the stumbling block is how does the Senate proceed, or how does this Congress proceed on that? And I think the difference is, should it be a 60-vote threshold or 51-vote threshold? And I know Senator Ernst, I wish you were here because she's been kind of the point person in those negotiations with Senator Heidkamp. So let me turn it over to Senator Heidkamp if you're prepared to talk about it, and just let's have that discussion.
This is a bill that I think has broad bipartisan support and can move forward, but I think we would have a very difficult time seeing this vote to final passage if we tied an actual vote count to this amendment. Plus, the original sponsor of this, Senator King, who we've been in contact with, who's been part of the ongoing negotiations and discussion, would vote against his own bill. And so I think we need more time. We need to take a look at this. And quite honestly, I don't know why we would put any vote count number in the actual bill. Just let the rules of the Senate dictate what the rules of the Senate dictate. So that's, at this point, the stumbling block. But I think we can work through this. I think there is the good news is there is broad bipartisan support for this concept. This bill needs a little more work. We're hoping that we'll have it available for the next markup in September, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, just kind of answer, I think the viewpoint would be kind of like a trade deal, or other things that are negotiated outside of Congress. You go through the very thoughtful process, sometimes the give and take of a particular commission. You get everybody, bipartisan support, because that commission would be, my understanding, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and then the chairperson appointed by the president. So there's somebody there to break the tie. But if in those proceedings, you come together and you lay out all these, and the give and take, that then would be presented to Congress with a simple up and down vote, not being able to be blocked by any kind of 60-vote threshold. And I can understand, same way with the treaty. How can you do the give and take? Sometimes those are some pretty difficult concessions made by the negotiating partners, and if those individuals aren't confident that they're just going to get an up and down vote, you may not have the type of result you're wanting out of the commission. So I think that's the process. And I know there was some discussion about, well, how about if you take a look at the actual vote from the commission, if you're unanimous, or if it's 6-3 or 7-2, to move it, basically leave it as normal Senate procedures with a 60-vote threshold, unless it achieved a certain level of support in that commission. Is that something that you'd be open to, or that Senator King would be open to?
I think one of the arguments that we get into when we look at, Mr. Chairman, the if this whole commission agreed to it, then why should we go over 50? The argument on the other side is if the whole commission agreed to it and it was unanimous, you shouldn't have any trouble getting to 60. You're restricting a minority right that I'm not familiar, because I'm new to this body, with the 60-vote threshold, but the traditional Senate rules are a 51-vote threshold. But we know over the last ensuing years, because of controversy, we're moving more and more to a 60-vote threshold. And so my argument on the other side would be, why not? It could be 51. No one is limiting it to 51. It could be 60. Let's let the rules of the Senate dictate what final passage would look like in terms of a vote count. And I think we would have a very, and that's the substantive argument. The very practical argument is, we would have a very hard time getting the kind of majority vote, 60 vote, which clearly we would have to get on this bill if it came up on its own on the floor of the Senate. So let's leave this silent. We can move this great concept forward. We can do what we've been working on, Senator Langford and I in the subcommittee, to try and clean up the mess that over the years this whole regulatory morass has created, and really get to the fundamentals of looking at a retrospective review. And to tie this up by restricting Senate rules on vote counts, I think is not a wise decision, because we now have the tail wagging the dog. We hope that this commission will come up with unanimous suggestions, which I think clearly would pass the 60-vote threshold, and in fact could get unanimous consent, could be hotlined. And so, you know, I see the give and take, and I see the concern, but obviously, having gone through the last 2 years where 51-vote margins have become so controversial, as opposed to 60-vote margins, I think leaving it silent is the best path forward. But I'm willing to have ongoing discussions about whether there's alternatives to even that idea. And I think that Senator King, as he introduced this bill, had a 60-vote threshold in the bill. We were able to have a discussion and say, why have any discussion about vote count? So we were hoping that the folks who were insisting on the 51 would come to the middle. We weren't able to get there yet. And so I think we need ongoing discussions and ongoing negotiations.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Again, thank you for involvement, and and again, appreciate your willingness to continue to discuss it. Senator Carper, do you want to weigh in on this?
We all know Angus King pretty well, a thoughtful guy, former governor, and somebody that we respect, and he has brought us something that's worth considering, worth debating, and worth voting on. There's been a fair amount of work that's gone on, and some changes that are offered. He said to me earlier this week that if the bill were reported out of committee like this, that he would not be able to support his own bill, and which is a matter of concern to me. That doesn't happen every day, and so we need to be mindful of that. And see, I have some serious reservations about it. I like working with Angus and with all of you, and if we can work them out, then fine. It's really hard. We all know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. To get anything on the floor these days, it almost has to be like we saw transportation, but we're competing on the TSCA bill, with a bill that came out with over 50 co-sponsors, equally divided between Democrat and Republican, and we're having a hard time getting the bill onto the floor. And we're competing with our own cybersecurity legislation. So it's to the extent that we can bring a bill to the floor that's strong bipartisan approval, and there's not much objection, that we almost need that to get floor time. So.
Anybody else want to further discuss this bill? Let me just kind of close out the discussion in terms of, you know, certainly what I hear. I think every member hears the regulatory burden, and so I think this is a sincere attempt. Let's face it, we're legislators here, so we legislate, so we keep always adding things, additional layers. And of course, Senator Langford is, chairing a subcommittee really focusing on this with Senator Heidkamp. So we've got to come up with some kind of process of subtraction, of modernization, of streamlining. So highly supportive of it. I just want to make sure that everybody, and I appreciate everybody's attempt to move forward in this and report something out, because, bottom line is, I agree with you. It'd be nice to, when this commission would actually report, the recommendations are passed unanimously, if that's at all possible, because then we know we've got the support of the full Congress, which means we've got support of the American public. So that's a good goal. I do want to eventually turn to a discussion of a Senate resolution that is introduced by Senator Flake and McCain and Grassley and myself. But before that, I know, Senator Langford, I know you had a couple pieces of legislation that were originally proposed for this markup.
There were.
Happy to offer you time to discuss those.
Well, I will just voice the same sentiment that Senator Portman also voiced on this, that there's been some concerns and questions. Senator Heidkamp and I are working on these together. We found multiple areas of common ground. We have very common agreement on some of the regulatory issues. We're working with OMB on this to make sure that at the very beginning of this, all parties that would be affected would be included in it. But it's just basic things that we've all talked about for a long time. And in fact, multiple administrations have done for most of the agency decisions, but not all. And we'd like to get a chance to be able to walk through that regulatory review and getting that retrospective look back was a key aspect to that. Getting the the transparency of the process, getting more people included in the process earlier. These are all things that we have common agreement on across both parties. We are a government of the people, by the people, for the people. It'd be nice if the people were actually involved in the decision-making. And so that's what we're trying to work through the process. None of it's been starkly controversial, except for a couple of words and phrases and a few mandates that come back to the administration. What would be a future administration wouldn't be this administration, because by the time we rolled it out, it would be into the next administration. So we're trying to work this through with them. So we think they'll be ready by September, ready to go to markup, and I don't think they'll be difficult once they get there.
Okay, great. I mean, we're going to be very supportive of those efforts, and we appreciate your work on that. Any other potential piece of legislation people want to discuss before I move on to a brief discussion of Operation Streamline? Well, we did pass out a chart prepared by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and we had offered a piece of legislation. This is really Senator McCain and Flake and Grassley, and I was happy to join in it as chairman of this committee. Apparently, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Arizona has announced it would no longer, or there are reports it will no longer prosecute first-time legal border crossers under the Operation Streamline, which apparently has been extremely effective. And where this was implemented in the Yuma sector in fiscal, I guess it was 2004, prior to that, the Yuma sector saw 140,000 immigrants apprehended. By last year, there are only 6,000. And, you know, basically what Operation Streamline is it's a streamlined adjudication process where first-time offenders of or illegal immigrants are brought before a judicial proceeding in groups of 7, and they're returned. It seems to be a very effective process. And so this, you know, we don't have don't have a quorum to vote on this, but I guess I would just ask the committee's consideration of this as we move forward. From my standpoint, it's types of, and again, all this would be a sense of the Senate resolution. You know, giving DHS, which, by the way, the Border Patrol, we've been told they want to be able to utilize this process. And we're concerned the Department of Justice is going to take that away from them. So this just be a sense of the Senate resolution confirming the fact that we want U.S. Customs and Border Protection and DHS to be able to utilize this because it's proven to be effective. And if we're going to improve the security of our border, and I think that's really the way I'm trying to describe this, is how can we increase border security? Because we know, you know, from our committee hearings, the 8 hearings we've had, the roundtables, how incredibly complex and how difficult this issue is. I really am looking, and of course we passed the information requirement bill basically on the border security in this markup. It's that step-by-step process of continuous improvement that will help do that. This is one of those steps that I think is important to improve the security of our border. So, you know, I'm looking forward to potentially being able to vote on this during the next markup as well.
Senator Flake, I think, just returned from Africa this morning, bright and early, very early, with the President and some of our colleagues. And I have not had he's been gone for, I think, 5 days, and haven't had a chance to talk with him about his bill, and look forward now to having a chance to do that. I know it's important to him and to Senator McCain. There are also those who have real concerns about whether or not what they want to do is the right thing to do, going to work or not. So we'll have a chance to do it. I'm glad we're going to be given that time, and look forward to engaging with them.
Okay, well, before I close out the hearing, is there any further discussion? Anybody want to talk about any other amendments they might have offered, or not hearing any? I ask unanimous consent that the full committee majority and minority staff, by mutual agreement, be authorized to make any required technical and conforming changes to the measures we've reported out today. Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The business meeting is adjourned.